not. Naga Vadvaha, the wives of the serpent demon. Arhane, in worshipping. Ishire, were unable to proceed. Riya, because of bashfulness. Yatpadayo, of whose lotus feet. Sparshana, by the touching. Darshita, agitated. Indriya, whose senses. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. For persons with impure vision, the Supreme Lord's eyes appear like those of someone who indiscriminately drinks intoxicating beverages. Thus bewildered, such unintelligent persons become angry at the Supreme Lord, and due to their angry mood, the Lord himself appears angry and very fearful. However, this is an illusion. When the wives of the serpent demon were agitated by the touch of the Lord's lotus feet, due to shyness they could proceed no further in their worship of him. Yet the Lord remained unagitated by their touch, for he is equipoised in all circumstances. Therefore, who will not worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Purport by C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anyone who remains unagitated, even in the presence of cause for agitation, is called dhira, or equipoised. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, being always in a transcendental position, is never agitated by anything. Therefore, someone who wants to become dhira must take shelter of the lotus feet of the Lord. In Bhagavad Gita 2:13, Krishna says, Dhirastatra namuyati. A person who is equipoised in all circumstances is never bewildered. Prahlad Maharaj is a perfect example of a dhira. When the fierce form of Nrsingadev appeared in order to kill Hiranyakashipu, Prahlad was unagitated. He remained calm and quiet, whereas others, including even Lord Brahma, were frightened by the features of the Lord. End of purport. Translation: for persons with impure vision, the Supreme Lord's eyes appear like those of someone who indiscriminately drinks intoxicating beverages. Thus bewildered, such unintelligent persons become angry at the Supreme Lord, and due to their angry mood, the Lord himself appears angry and very fearful. However, this is an illusion. When the wives of the serpent demon were agitated by the touch of the Lord's lotus feet, due to shyness they could proceed no further in their worship of him. Yet the Lord remained unagitated by their touch, for he is equipoised in all circumstances. Therefore, who will not worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Om Jnana-timirandasya Jananjana Salakaya Chakshurunmritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Panchakalpatarubhascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasati Gaura Bhakta-vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we continue with further beautiful discussions in this particular chapter 17. And here we get some very telling instructions on things that we all face every day. We hear about our endeavors. We attempt to have pure vision, but there is impure vision from time to time. We hear how this is illusion in this particular context. And we also are directed to be equipoised and unagitated. And we hear about dhira. We'll talk about that too, the meaning, because Srila Prabhupada references Bhagavad Gita 2:13 in the purport. And that's a famous verse. Translation is, as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, The soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Prabhupada also speaks of Prahlad Maharaj as an example, how he was fearless. And in that same example, he says, among all the personalities there, even Lord Brahma was so great, he had some fear, but Prahlad, he didn't. So we'll talk a little bit today about this impure vision, about Dhira. We'll maybe share a little bit about Prahlad Maharaj, and then we'll open up for some conversation and reflections. So this impure vision, actually, it's quite heavily here in the actual Sanskrit translation, a person with polluted vision, asat, drisha. So being in the conditioned state, this is there. And so let's understand a little bit more about how this comes to be. We just by being in this material energy, this body, there's so much impurities, but somehow through the process, we talk about purification, purifying. So Prabhupada shares in a lecture from first canto, in human life, if we do not purify our existence, then we go on with this impure existence. But what does it actually mean? And Prabhupada gives a very straightforward understanding. It just means transmigration of the soul from one body to another and becoming subjected to birth, death, old age, and disease. So this impurity is not any kind of, I don't know, moral judgment or anything like that. Like even if you have in the days past, someone's pure and impure based on some external identification or some casteism or this or that. No, this is simply the transmigration of the soul. This is impurification, Prabhupada says. Because why? In our conditioned state, we don't realize that death is not my obligation. Because I'm impure, therefore I am dying. Birth is not my obligation. Because I'm impure, therefore I'm taking birth. Janma, Mrityu. There are four things we know. Janma, Mrityu, Jara, Vyadi. Janma, birth, is due to my impure consciousness. So then how do we purify our consciousness? By developing, and we know this, Krishna consciousness. And that's the process. And so Lord Chaitanya has given us this Chaita Darpana Marjanam, where we cleanse the heart. And all these methods of purification, they're based on cleansing the heart. But if I think of myself as I'm something of a material product, the scientists say that, right? They don't understand what is spiritual identity. Then I will act according to that material conception. And that's the impurity of my consciousness. So Prabhupada explains in this lecture that the first thing is to understand I'm not this material body. And so our first business, he continues in another time, when he's giving a lecture on sixth canto, he says, we want to stop this repetition of birth and death. Sometimes we're very happy, sometimes we're unhappy, sometimes we're fearful, sometimes in so many other calamities. But our first business is that we shall stop all these material desires. But we know, anya bilasita sunyam, to stop desires cannot be stopped, right? Because we're living entities. We're not dead stone. Desires can't be stopped. No. But what do? Desires are to be purified. Sarvopadi vinir muktam tat paratvena nirmalam. So we want to purify our desires, uplift ourselves. And, we see all over in this world, everyone is working under some impure consciousness. An example Prabhupada often quotes, and he does in this particular context too, is nationalism. I'm American, I am Indian, I'm Englishman, I am German. This desire is polluted because I'm spirit soul, part and parcel of Krishna. So what is the benefit of identifying with America or India? So this purification of desire is needed. You can see how we just fight one another because of this illusion. So Prabhupada goes on to say the whole problem of the material world can be solved only when we purify our desires. And that's a constant endeavor for the spiritualist. And so, this brings us to the point of being inquisitive. I don't want all these material conditions of life, miserable conditions, but why are they enforced? They're there, I can be happy, I have this body, this lifestyle, but who knows what is next? But life continues, and whatever place we are, there's only but a flash in that sliver of time. So we're constantly changing. So how do we come out of this? And we know that through the process of bhakti, we come out of this, yes. And so Prabhupada is saying, please, that's when he says, okay, uplift the vibrations. Please chant these 16 words. There's no loss. There's only immense gain. Make an experiment. It's not very difficult. The invitation is there. So Prabhupada was always very vocal about how everyone from all walks of life are getting benefit from this transcendental vibration. So Prabhupada is giving us the process and the explanation. If we take to this vibration, then we become directly in touch with the Supreme Lord. And that makes us purified. He says, just like if you go to the fire, you become warm. Similarly, if you're directly in touch with the Supreme Spirit, then purification begins. So Prabhupada compels us, take to this movement, chant Hare Krishna, then this impure consciousness will be purified. And that's the process, cleansing the mind, cleansing the heart. And then our material anxieties are immediately over. At least material anxieties. Yes, there might be other anxieties in the line of devotional service. So, yeah, so these are the kind of understandings about this impure consciousness, impure vision. Let's see. As long as one does not inquire, it's a room conversation about the spiritual values of life, one is defeated and subjected to miseries arising from ignorance. Be it sinful or pious, karma has its resultant actions. If a person is engaged in any kind of karma, his mind is called karmatmaka, colored with fruitive activity. So as long as the mind is impure, consciousness is unclear, and as long as one is absorbed in fruitive activity, we have to accept a material body. So this is the situation. And so in order to come out of that, we take to the chanting, we take to the process, we endeavor, and we try to uplift, purify, get the higher taste, because we're hearing how desires cannot be stopped. And then Prabhupada talks about dhira, and he references obviously 213. So we know dhira means one who's not disturbed. But it's so interesting because it also means one who's not disturbed, even when there is sufficient provocation, even when there is good reason, sufficient provocation. So there are many ways that we can try to remain equipoised, and we'll talk about some of them this morning. So one of them is in life, with all the relationships, there's so many provocations, but how to remain undisturbed. We want to be able to take to some sincere process, a sincere endeavor in devotional life. And so through some sincere surrender unto the lotus feet of Krishna, we awaken our transcendental sense of service. And we start to see our relationships as broader and higher and bigger than just what we get out of them, whether it's in family life or in any other situation. So we want to be able to not remain disturbed in those situations. There's a nice reflection Prabhupada gives in Canto 4, where he says, Dhira means sober, but sometimes there's also the word Vira, and Vira means hero. So he says, one who is struggling against Maya is a hero, and one who is sober enough to understand his position is a Dhira. And that's what we want to be. We want to be heroes in the conquest against Maya, and we want to be Dhira, sober enough to understand our position. And yeah, so we know that the agitation is always there. So there's this reference. So, and it's a little not funny but interesting, because this one here about in a lecture on Bhagavad Gita, Prabhupada is speaking in 1973, and he's saying, so Bhishma Dev, he's talking about how Krishna is never agitated. He says, so Bhishma Dev in the Rajasuya Yagya admitted, nobody is a better brahmachari than Krishna. He was within the gopis, all young girls, but he remained a brahmachari. So Krishna is the perfect brahmachari, Rishikesha. And these rascals, they're saying that Krishna is immoral. No, Krishna is perfect brahmachari. Dhira. Dhira means one who is not agitated even when there is cause of being agitated. So Krishna is such a brahmachari, in spite of his just on the verge of youthhood at the age of 15, 16. All the village girls were friends. They were very much attracted to his beauty. They would come for dancing in the village, but he was brahmachari. You'll never hear Krishna had some illicit activity. There was no such thing or description. The dancing is description. So, we start off with the Supreme Personality of Godhead who can be that way. So what to speak of all of us? How do we do this? So what are some other understandings of Dhira? So we heard about when we're being provoked, we try to remain equipoised. We're hearing about when we're agitated, try to remain Dhira, sober. Dhira also means someone very learned and very gentle. It says, he's the supreme, eternal among all other eternals. This is Krishna, the supreme living force. And he's also in everyone's heart. And anyone who can perceive Krishna's presence, Dhira, is very highly learned or very gentle. He is called Dhira. And of course, those who are not are called Adhira. So here's another way we can also attempt to be Dhira, become learned, become gentle. And so another more ways of that is this thing about, we're always in provoking situations. Not always, we're often in provoking situations, right? Or something that's kind of agitating us. So there's the Prabhupada quotes, of course, Kalidas, the great poet, he calls him. He says, even in the presence of provocation, one is not disturbed. And there is some self-restraint. There has to be some self-restraint. And that's another, practical attempt. While we try to develop the higher taste, it does take some regulation as well. And another way to be Dhira is one who is sober by education. Like we just heard about being very learned, being very gentle. We hear the classic example, at the time of death, when we lament, we say, my father is gone, my son is no more. But that pain of separation is there. Yes, it's true. They are no more. But the soul is eternal. The body is there. And, this is essential in our own comprehension of life to really come to the point of understanding that we are not this body, that when we are lamenting, we're lamenting in pain of, and experiencing the pain of separation, but we know that the soul continues to move on. Dhira is also, of course, as we said, one who is undisturbed in mind. Now, where does this disturbance come from? Prabhupada explains our disturbance of mind is due to our ignorance. He gives an example from his own situation. He says, suppose I want to go somewhere. Now I'm at the station. He said, actually, it happened to me when I came to New York from India. I was to be dispatched to Butler by the bus station, but I was a new man. I did not know the rules and regulations. So, of course, somebody was guiding me. Still, I was in a very much disturbed condition. How to get on the bus, how to get the ticket, how, all of these. So this disturbance of mind is due to ignorance, not knowing. And so, yeah, another take on Dhira and how also to take ourselves out of ignorance, because we are actually spirit in identity, and we can uncover knowledge. So there's so many more conversation points around Dhira. Just not being bewildered. Prabhupada says there are two classes of men, Dhira and Adhira. Dhira means one who is not agitated, they know things as they are. And Adhira means those who are uncontrolled. So, yeah. Dhira also means cool-headed. So Prabhupada is very heavy in this particular conversation. It was a lecture on the same 213, some references. He said, Dhira means sober and cool-headed, and just the opposite is Adhira. Actually, Adhira means third class, fourth class man, or rascals. And Dhira means sober. The exact translation, he says, is gentleman. He says, those who are not gentlemen, uncultured, uneducated rascal, they cannot understand. Otherwise, where is the difficulty? So, yeah, so many references here. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit more on, so we're hearing about impure vision, hearing about Dhira and all the ways we can, through education, coming out of ignorance, through remaining, trying to, even when there's cause for reaction and agitation and there's desires, how we can uplift ourselves. Let's hear a little bit about, I think Prabhupada mentions Prahlad Maharaj here. So Prahlad Maharaj, we all know the pastime, and Prabhupada is saying so nicely how even when the fierce form of Lord Nrsimhadev appeared, he did not get agitated. And I found some nice description of that. Let me quickly reference that here. Yeah. There was a class I was listening to, and in that class, the example of Prahlad Maharaj was spoken about, I was talking about types of fear. And then the speaker was quoting Prahlad Maharaj. He says, different personalities were asking Prahlad Maharaj, weren't you fearful in the pit of snakes? Like, when you were thrown in the pit, weren't you fearful? And Prahlad Maharaj's reply was, my father is Vishnu, and he always rests on Anantashesh, and he's the master of all snakes. So how can I be harmed? He said, and then they said, well, weren't you afraid when you were thrown in fire? And so Prahlad Maharaj had to come back for everything. He says, my father is Vishnu and fire represents the mouth of Vishnu. So I'm in the mouth of my father. How can I be afraid? He says, even when the personality said, oh, you were poisoned and weren't you afraid of, being there and what will happen? He says, when the milk ocean was being churned, Lakshmi came, my father's Vishnu, And out of that, poison came. And so poison is my maternal uncle. So how will I die if I'm with my maternal uncle? You got to come back for everything. So, somehow we can develop this vision to see Krishna everywhere. And in this way, we won't have this fear. Like Prahlad Maharaj was fearless in this situation. So he wasn't an illusion. It was not an illusion. And when we are fearless, because we have proper understanding, then, we can maintain proper relationships, take proper decisions, and not, then be constantly worried about the past or lament about it and anxious about the future, but we can just be fully joyful in the here and now. And we know that the ultimate conquest of fear is through, strong practice. And Srimad Bhagavatam is the means of conquest, because as we associate with the mentalities and consciousness of Bhagavatam, we begin to absorb and achieve the same results. So it's just, there's so much more to say on Prahlad Maharaj and his qualities. Let's see, he's such a great devotee. He's fearless. He has absolute faith in Krishna. His compassion for everyone, even his crazy dad. He had no interest in childish playthings. He was free from pride. He was such a heroic preacher. So, very kind of beautiful pastime with Prahlad Maharaj. And then, what was the other themes? We also hear about how Lord Brahma, although he being such a great person, was really afraid. But Prahlad Maharaj, with his purity. Now, on a practical matter, we could say, well, how do we remain unagitated? We do get angry, but we read often this kind of proper ways to be angry. Here's a quick summary of 5 signs of spiritual anger. It's when anger is based on selflessness, which is free of ego and pride. It's about when anger is without a grudge, which incorporates forgiveness. It's anger that's spiritual when it doesn't impair intelligence and discrimination. Anger that preserves higher values and principles. And anger which inspires and elevates others. And generally we know, Vaishnavas are usually express anger when there is some offense to some other Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis, and they feel this impetus. So next time, we're kind of feeling agitated and we feel something swelling up in us, we can do a quick check. And, am I free of false ego and pride? Can I forgive? Am I uplifting higher values and principles? Is this elevating myself and others? And, we pray to Lord Nrsimhadev in this way. To be able to, when we're dealing with that emotion, be able to have a proper approach to that, or in the heat of the moment, to be able to somehow tap into our higher consciousness. And what to speak of, even in this day and age, on a practical note, it's like human relationships are riddled with quarrel and conflict. It's just a symptom of the age. But we need to understand at some point as we mature that, disagreement is kind of has both positive and negative potential, because differences of opinion can bring enlightenment and can bring transformation and wisdom and growth. They can also be the cause of anger, frustration, resentment, fallout. But we want to, be progressive in our responses, develop such progressive approaches. From all the kind of readings and the different devotees that help us understand conflicts and, differences, we know, tolerance is so critical. The first moments of a conflict situation can determine the entire conversation. So it's so important that we try to be tolerant and patient we're often reminded how the art of conversation is not only to say the right thing at the right time, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moments. It takes a lot of self-restraint for that. And adopting like an adversarial approach really puts up a barrier, which blocks the meeting of hearts. And this is all notes to myself because so often I find myself in such situations. So reminders. What about, just some things that are just circumstantial? We need to be able to understand the other person and seek to, first to understand, then to be understood. It requires an open heart, an open mind, because, in the kind of nonviolent communication framework, the whole point of any relationship is connection. And that's kind of very closely aligned to our bhakti practice. We want connection with Krishna, connection with ourselves, the actual spirit soul, our true identity, connection with each other on that platform through devotional service and Sangha. Also, in terms of like just trying to stay equipoised, it doesn't always have to be like a right or wrong answer. And diversity is not necessarily bad. We're all individuals. That's kind of like the potency of this movement. We're individuals. We're not individualistic, but we're personalists. So we can, fully appreciate that conflict is often a case of different angles of vision, hopefully illuminating the same truth. Okay, I want to serve Prabhupada this way, and I want to serve Prabhupada that way, but we all want to serve Prabhupada. So in that diversity, we focus on what unifies us. And also kind of just gauging the importance of different topics that come up when we're feeling agitated, different themes that come up for us. We need to keep things in perspective and calmly evaluate the relative importance of those particular, triggers and points of agitation. So, we don't have to like be emotionally involved and keep, fighting something to the last breath. No, we want to be able to keep things in perspective and calmly evaluate what is that bigger picture. And of course, we hope to transcend. We want to transcend because transcendence is not just right and wrong, right? Transcendence is actually beyond that. So the real aim of a conflict and when we kind of agitated is not like victory but more progress. If we concede a point in a conflict, it can improve our relationships, can help us develop character. Sometimes in the hope of being right, we lose sometimes our relationships, we lose character. And but yes, if we focus on going beyond the right and wrong and actually really being transcendental and considering the big whole picture, relationships, character, then we can come, we arrive at progressive outcomes. Of course, a big block to us trying to be dhira is pride also. It's just how we are in terms of wide in this material body, our mind, our subtle body, mind, false ego, intelligence really is prominent unless we keep it in check through solid practice and some practical tools. And we know, with pride, it's difficult. We don't last. We don't learn. We can't love. There's this famous saying that's by not someone in our parampara who says, a proud man is always looking down on things and people. And of course, as long as we're looking down, we cannot see something that's above us. So, that's kind of some things that we also can work on. And, maybe one final point, and we can have some conversations about these. As we live and serve together, we get to know each other very well, and sometimes that familiarity is there, and so reactions are kind of unchecked and uncensored, and we're just who we are. So I think it's important to try to somehow endeavor to view each other as very sincere practitioners while we're working on ourselves, each of us, you know. So this, you know, we want, instead of seeing all these faults that are sometimes agitating us, you know, look at at ourselves and how we can improve. Bhaktisiddhanta in 64 Principles of Community Building says, when faults in others misguide you, then be patient, introspect, and look for faults within ourselves. Know that nobody can harm you unless you harm yourself. So, you know, really developing the spiritual vision that we really building ourselves to be able to do that. But it doesn't mean just to see how far someone is from, you know, from the ideal, but it's to appreciate also how far we've progressed and improved. And you know, we're all in the shower. So, you know, and it need not decrease our faith in the power of the spiritual tradition of bhakti, you know. We see so many persons, we want, you know, we always kind of think, oh, like the saints are previous acharyas. Yes, they are, but even among each other, there's such saintly personalities, devotees. And but we need to know how to understand that and identify them and look around and be able to yeah, with a gracious heart, see the amazing examples that are before us and be inspired by that. So on that note, we'll just read the translation once more. For persons with impure vision, the Supreme Lord's eyes appear like those of someone who indiscriminately drinks intoxicating beverages. Thus bewildered, such unintelligent persons become angry at the Supreme Lord, and due to their angry mood, the Lord himself appears angry and very fearful. However, this is an illusion. When the wives of the serpent demon were agitated by the touch of the Lord's lotus feet, due to shyness, they could proceed no further in their worship of him. Yet the Lord remained unagitated by their touch, for he is equipoised in all circumstances. Therefore, who will not worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead? Thank you, devotees. Any thoughts, reflections? Love to hear those. Sorry I went on a little longer. Wasn't watching the time.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Taraka Prabhu.
How are you?
I am well. How about you?
Oh, it's a long story. I
Oh, it's
am,
post Ekadasi. That's why. I know your Ekadasis.
yeah, there's always a lot going on. Speaking of Dira, I'm trying to be peaceful in the light of I'm looking at these trading charts, and I see that I am in jeopardy of losing about $45,000 today. Trying to be Dira in spite of this. Um, you've given me a lot to think about here today. You inspired a tsunami of thoughts. I like the you spoke about pridelessness as a one one avenue, one particular angle that is important to becoming um, steady or undisturbed, Dira. Um, and I was thinking about a bunch of things that had not occurred to me, but then I realized, yeah, of course, Shikshasika 3, of course, Trinadapi, Shinichena, all of these things. If we can adopt that consciousness of humility and pridelessness, that brings us a very long way towards becoming Dira. We eliminate so many agitating elements. Um, and that inspires another whole tsunami of thoughts because I worry sometimes that devotees are sometimes quick to dismiss Shikshastika 3 because of concerns about the potential for abuses, the potential for someone to be subjected to abuses and tolerating them needlessly, as we sometimes see in marital relationships. But Lord Chaitanya is directing us to cultivate this consciousness of extraordinary tolerance, like a tree. That's incredibly tolerant. But at the same time, we have instruction from Srila Prabhupada that we should not be foolish, we should not be stupid. We do have to protect our body. We understand this is Krishna's body; it's meant for his service. We have to protect that. We can be humble and tolerant. We can think of ourselves as very lowly, but Krishna has given us facility that we are obliged to preserve. Anyway, that's going off on a tangent there. But to get back to the issue of steadiness or dhira being undisturbed, I had a little exchange with Yashudev yesterday in class. We were talking about Bhagavad Gita over the past couple of days, and I had mentioned that in Srila Prabhupada's 1956 essay entitled "Conception of Gita Nagari," there are two parts, part one and part two. In part two to that essay, he says. And in his essay, he emphasizes these words by typing them in all capitals and double spacing them. He says, "It shall be the foremost business of Gita Nagari to chalk out its plan of action strictly on the teachings of Bhagavad Gita and nothing more or nothing less." So Yashudev and I were contemplating what does that really mean, and if you read through the those two parts of this essay, it actually reads like a blueprint for ISKCON. Not and so I don't think it should be necessarily interpreted as being specific instruction for Gita Nagari. There was no Gita Nagari at the time. It was conceptual idea that Srila Prabhupada had, but it is significant that Srila Prabhupada later chose to change the name of Gita Nagari to Gita Nagari from
New Varshana. New
right.
Varshana.
Yes. So anyway, but if he did absolutely emphasize so much the importance of Bhagavad Gita and acting on the basis of Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita. There is nothing that he quotes more in all of his lectures and purports than Bhagavad Gita. He really leaned very, very heavily on Bhagavad Gita. So what does Krishna say in Bhagavad Gita about the issue of becoming undisturbed? Starting in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives instruction about, first of all, that, you're not this body. And that is a tremendous help to becoming steady, to understand that, first of all, I have nothing to do with this body. So, why should I be disturbed by whatever is happening in connection with the body? So early in the chapter in text 14, he suggests and he presents a few different angles, and it's interesting. I'm not I don't really understand why he chooses to progress in the way that he does, but So in chapter 14, he says, Matra Sparshastu Kanteya Sutoshna Sukadugada Agama Payanonetyastam Chitikshas Vabharata. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress, and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O Sayana Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So here he's recommending tolerance. But once again, explaining that the disturbance that is coming from these dualities is arising from sense perception, which is a function of the body, the bodily senses. And if you are not those things, then why should you be disturbed? But because you have a tendency to identify with the body and its senses and thereby become disturbed, so you should just simply tolerate. And then he gives another angle in the 59th text of the second chapter, in which he suggests that one becomes steady by cultivating a higher taste. He says, Vishaya vinivartante niraharasya dehina prasavarjam rasopyasya paramdrishvarni vartate. That though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagement by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. And everyone can understand the logic of that, that if you have something superior, then the inferior things become insignificant by comparison. This is but this is a very important process. This is so much of our whole process of the cultivation of Krishna consciousness relies upon this principle that we cultivate a higher taste by everything that we do in Krishna consciousness, by hearing and chanting, by honoring prasad, and so on. In all these ways, we cultivate a superior taste, which enables us to easily tolerate lower distractions. Other sorts of tastes become insignificant and easy to forego. But then later in the third chapter, Arjuna is asking a question of Krishna. He says, what by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? And trying to understand how these things are happening. And Krishna explains that it is lust, which arises when you come in contact with the mode of passion. And he explains how destructive this is, and how everyone is covered with different degrees of lust in various ways. And talks about the sitting places of lust: the mind, the intelligence, and the senses are the sitting places. So if you're engaged in combat with some enemy, you want to know where they are, so that you can deal with them. So he explains, where this lust is situated. And then, but he gives instruction on how to deal with this lust, which is a tremendous source of disturbance. In order to become Dhira, he says, in the very beginning, curve this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. And then again, he makes reference to the understanding of how we are different from the body, and all of its different constituents. He says the working senses are superior to dull matter, and mind is higher than the senses, and intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. So he's making clear what your position is, that you're not any of these things, but there is a hierarchy of control, and you can utilize that information to your advantage. You can control the senses by controlling the higher elements, and ultimately you want to be conscious, very conscious all of the time, of just basically who you are. You want to remember who you are. That I am not any of these things. I'm not any of these elements. Who am I? I am the soul who is even higher than the intelligence. So if we can actually remember who we are, then everything else falls into place. And so in the final text of the third chapter, text 43, he says, thus knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, and thus by spiritual strength conquer the insatiable enemy known as lust. So he is saying that you utilize your intelligence, remembering who you are, that you are transcendental to all of these things, but you utilize your intelligence to consider, to deliberate. Now, and he's referring to spiritual intelligence because there is also spiritual intelligence, but even the material intelligence, when engaged in Christian service, is spiritualized. In any case, you utilize your intelligence to understand what actually is your position, how you are different from these elements, and from that comes spiritual strength and the ability to overcome those disturbing elements. Lust is one of many disturbing elements, but one can become dearer by acquiring a higher taste and by deliberate spiritual intelligence, by thinking about these things and understanding what is my actual position. I'm not this mind. I'm not this body. I'm not these senses. I'm not any of these things. So why am I engaging in them? Why am I disturbed by any of them? If I am apart from these things, if I have nothing to do with any of these things, why am I disturbed? If you devotees don't, and they don't go to the cinema, they don't go to movies. But if you did, and you might have experience in the past of having seen a movie, you go into a dark theater and there's this great big screen and fabulous sound system, and you become very absorbed in what's going on. It's completely different from you. It has nothing to do with you. It's not even real. It's just a fantasy, but you become engaged to the extent that you experience actual feelings, strong emotions. You may become angry. You may become you may cry. You may laugh. As though you're actually involved in what's happening. You experience it as real, and then at some point the lights come on after the show is over, and suddenly your perspective is readjusted. You understand who you really are. I'm not the character in this movie, and I have nothing to do with any of that. I'm completely separate from all these things, and then you become undisturbed by whatever happened in the movie. So one of the processes that Krishna is describing here in the third chapter is that, to understand, to stand back from all of this and not be buried and enmeshed in the processes of the mind and senses, but to remain aloof from them and to understand who you really are. Anyway, interesting to consider some of the different angles that Krishna is suggesting. And there is more throughout Bhagavad Gita, but we are running over time, and I'll just shut up and go away. Thank you again for a lovely class. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Thakur Prabhu, for expanding on it with all these other very crucial points and instructions. Yes, everything is contained in the Bhagavad Gita, and somehow we have to mold our lives according to the teachings. Live it, breathe it, be it. Thank you, thank you. That was very, gave a nice big picture, and also the incremental ways of the practicalities of us endeavoring in this path. Thank you. Other thoughts and reflections, devotees, before we wrap up?
Hare Krishna, good morning. Parijata Devi Dasi. How are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's always so sweet to see your face. Happy New Year and all of that.
Thank you. You too.
You gave such really nice practical points, and I was thinking about after I chant in the morning and before I start reading, I do try to practice pranayama and just really focusing, bringing the breath in, pausing, letting it out, and practicing that whatever those thoughts that start rolling around about, oh, now you need to do this later today, letting them pass and not getting agitated in my mind and being right where I am. And that's a lot of it. And I love when you shared about Srila Prabhupada saying that, if the agitation came because of ignorance. When I feel like I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm not going to get something I think I need, or, I'm going to lose something I think I have, that's when the mind starts running around. And for me, a very practical tool then is to bring myself back to where I am and use pranayama to focus on the breath and to realize that what's going on in my mind, first of all, the worst things that go on in my mind usually don't even happen. And also, I need to be where I am and not all these other places in my head that I can't even actually be. So that helps on staying steady. I don't know if I'm Dira, but I try to be stira, at least be steady in the boat, if not, And then also I was thinking about an experience I had this weekend because it was Epiphany, which in the Christian faith is a big deal. It's when the three magi or kings, which I say the three acharyas now, came from the east to see the baby Jesus. And my husband, he's Christian still, and so he wanted me to go with him on Sunday. And I said, sure, I'll go. And after the service, which was wonderful, it was, and my sister sent me something, and it was an Indian priest, and he was talking about how they were actually astrologers and astronomers, and that's how they followed the star. And after church, I hadn't seen a lot of these women. We call them sisters in church for a long time, obviously, and they were like, "Oh, it's okay," give me a lot of love. And we started talking about Epiphany, and I was like, "Well, they were actually sages." And they brought some very practical Ayurvedic gifts. They brought frankincense and myrrh, right? Which myrrh is really good for diaper rash, and frankincense can really calm down a nursing mother, right? So it's like they actually brought shower gifts. And they were like, oh. And I was like, yeah. And we started talking. And then one of them told me that her daughter has been in contact with devotees and had given her a Bhagavad Gita as it is, and she was reading it.
Wow.
So you know what? My mind, when he asked me to go, was like, oh, I can't go because, now I'm practicing, but and all of that stuff. And then I was like, all right, push past it. God is God. Just go with the best intention and to support your husband. And look what Krishna arranged. So we talked, and we're going to talk further. And it's like when you just let things be what they are, when I can stop trying to impose all my crazy thoughts on stuff, then Krishna, I can get me out of the way. And that's one of my prayers. And I do say a prayer every day that's from a Catholic mystic, St. Teresa of Avila. And it's, let nothing disturb you, let nothing frighten you. All things pass away, but God never changes. Patience obtains all things, but she who has God finds she lacks nothing. God alone suffices. So, yeah. Thank you so much for your class.
Thank you.
And you've given me so many things to meditate on today.
Thank you so much for sharing. What a wonderful pastime on the weekend, and the experience and the reflections. Thank you. Thank you. Always wonderful to hear. So many wonderful points to meditate on, devotees, as we all endeavor on this royal path. So if there's nothing else, we can wrap up and end here, and wishing each other Krishna's mercy and blessings on all of us, and always that we can remember who we really are, so we can act in proper consciousness. Thank you, devotees. Take care. Have a wonderful
one
day.
quick thing.
Yes, Tat Prabhu.
Mother Leela Kishore made an interesting point, talking about pranayama, which is, this is another thing which was recommended by Krishna in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. He talks about Ashtanga yoga. It's another means to become Dhira. Ultimately, this is rejected by Arjuna, but and Krishna's conclusion, of course, the Bhagavad Gita is just surrender unto me, just follow my instructions. But anyway, I just pranayama is also recommended by Krishna. It's another way, mechanical process for steadying the mind. All right, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Leela Kishore and others. And all glories to Srimad Bhagavatam, all glories to the assembled Vaishnavas. Hare Krishna devotees, all glories to Srila Prabhupada.